This is a sermon for an 11 a.m. service in a church of middle class people that I have been in for a while. Some of you know that I am going to seminary right now. Well, I was in Edmonton a couple weeks ago, and I was talking with one of my good friends about what I'd been learning in seminary. And I was talking specifically about the prophets and how the prophets of Israel teach us about what worship looks like. Because in their day, just like in ours, it's easy to succumb to thinking that worship is all about ritual. It's about things like showing up to church. It's about maybe writing your tithe check. It's about attending a small group, being part of this or that program. You create your Christian list of things to do. Well, I was talking to him about how the prophets blow open those superficial lists and how they challenge us to the heart of worship and the heart of God, which includes how we care for people in every facet of our life, and even beyond that to the realities of corporate injustice and sin and collective and systemic injustice and sin. To the fact that sometimes, even though none of us consciously built a system of injustice, we endlessly participate in systems that keep poor people poor, that keep marginalized people marginalized, that fail to identify needs and care for those who are most needy. Well, we've been talking about that, and not surprising to probably many of you, I got a little bit passionate and I probably droned on, and my friend very graciously listened to me. And then we decided we were going to go for lunch. And so we left his workplace where we were and walked across the street. As we were waiting at the traffic light on our way to get some wonderful fried chicken, we saw this lady wearing headphones just walk out into the road. It was a very busy, large intersections, 6 lanes going either way, and this lady walked kitty corner between cars, swerving, screaming to a halt, honking their horns, showing their middle fingers to this lady, yelling out windows. And she staggered her way across. My friend and I were immediately struck. We kind of jumped back and watched this woman. I said, "Hey, can you hang on for a sec? I think we should watch her." And she sat down at a bus stop on the other side of the street. And then she did it again. And she was almost run over again as she walked through this busy intersection, regardless of the traffic lights. And so I told my friend, "I think we should probably do something." And we talked about it for 10 seconds or 15 seconds, and then he called 911. And then we had a decision to make. At the end of that call, the police thanked him for reporting it and said, "You don't have to hang around, but you can if you want." And so we talked about it a little bit, and we both felt a little bit better, though I admit we were both a bit reluctant too. We felt better about hanging around, and so we did. And the minutes droned by, and this lady displayed all kinds of signs of erratic behavior. I think she was probably having some kind of a mental breakdown. Thankfully, she didn't walk into traffic, but we stayed relatively near her, hoping that we might be able to help her if something came up, but also afraid that if we went to talk to her, that we might trigger something. Well, the end of the story is that eventually, after another 911 call, and about 10 minutes later, the police showed up, and we expect that they care for this lady. Now, here's the thing. Let me confess something. Many of you know that I worked for several years with the homeless. And so you'd think that these kind of things would be easy for me now and that I'd be comfortable. You know something? It was really tempting to just walk on by, to assume that she would be just fine, to do little, or even maybe after making our 911 phone call to say, we've done our due diligence. And as I thought about those things, the words of the prophets that I had been telling my friend about screamed out to me. Now let me just read you a few of the words of Jesus and think about them in light of the story I just told. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" he replied. "How do you read it?" He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this and you will live." But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and when he was attacked by robbers, they stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine, and then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. "Look after him," he said, "and when I return I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have." Which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? The expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." My friends, I tell you that story not to point out a good thing I do. The reality is, after all the years that I've been around those kind of situations, it should have been the easy thing for me to do. But it still wasn't. And an awful lot of people walked by that day. This week, might we not walk by? Might we go slow enough to see those people? And might God give us grace and courage to do what's right, regardless of how it might interrupt our routines, and especially when we spend our time talking about what it means to worship. Might we live lives of worship. God bless.